and welcome to Creativity is the Future. Suzie Boss is our guest speaker this evening. You can find her on Twitter at Suzie Boss. If you want to join the conversation on Twitter, please, by all means, tweet out your talking points and your takeaways using the hashtag CreateEDU. So, in case you're wondering why we're having this webinar series, we really wanted to bring in some voices in the field of education that really stress creativity and its powerful impact on student achievement and student learning. Beyond this evening, some upcoming topics include Who's Telling Your Story on December 10th, Teaching for Creativity in the Common Core Classroom in mid-January, How Do You Do It? Insights from School Administrators, February 18th. Then we have Ignite Talks, What does creativity in education look like to you, with a panel of speakers in March. Using digital storytelling as an instructional strategy in April, and the future of digital learning closes out in May. I am pleased to present Suzie Boss as our guest speaker this evening. How can schools help to develop the next generation of innovators? Well, tonight Suzie Boss, a project-based learning advocate and author, is going to help us understand challenges and how to design solutions that unleash student creativity. Suzie is a journalist and a consultant who really focuses on the power of teaching and learning to improve the lives and transform communities. She has developed numerous programs for nonprofit organizations that teach youth and adults how to improve their communities with innovative, sustainable solutions. She is the co-author of Reinventing Project-Based Learning, your field guide to real-world projects in the digital age, as well as Thinking Through Project-Based Learning. She is a regular contributor to Edutopia and the Stanford Social Innovation Review. Her work has appeared in a wide range of other publications, including Ed Leadership, Principal Leadership, the New York Times, Huffington Post, and Newsweek. Suzie, welcome.
Thanks so much for your introduction, and really for the invitation to join this great conversation that you're having. It's just so important. The topic is so important, and you're bringing in diverse perspectives from what we understand about innovation. The more perspectives, the better. So let's dig into our topic today, which is really about bringing innovation right into the classroom. Getting right down to the nitty-gritty of getting students into the role of innovators. How do we do that? How do we get it going? So when I talk with students about this topic, and it just happens to be pretty much my favorite topic in the world right now, I often ask them this question for openers. Who do you think of? Who do you picture when you think of an innovator? And if you want to add your thoughts in the chat, feel free to do that. But I'll go ahead with a little spoiler alert here and tell you who students think of right off the bat. Often these famous folks come to mind. If anybody's recognizing them, feel free to add them in the chat. Of course, we have here Ford and Edison, a couple of our innovators from history, students who've been studying the future of the history of industrialization and automobiles and light bulbs and all these amazing American inventions. Often think of these folks when they think of innovators, and that's certainly true. I'll ask students sometimes, who else do you think of? Surely innovation didn't stop way back when. And they will say sometimes, this gentleman comes to mind, or some of his contemporaries in the current tech world. Founders of Google and Facebook, for example. But often that's as far as the conversation goes with students. And that's just a shame, because they're missing out on some other innovators who are hard at work, solving really challenging, interesting, important problems through their own creativity and problem solving and collaboration. And let me just give you a few examples of some of the innovators I've met in my kind of search and field research to try to find who's out there doing the hard work of innovation today. These are some students in my hometown of Portland, Oregon. They're part of a national program called MESA that puts students into the role of engineers. Technologists. It's a STEM pipeline project to try to encourage students from a young age to go into these important fields that we know we need a good pipeline of folks interested in. These students are taking part in a challenge, a design challenge, where using very low-cost materials There was a cap on how much they could spend, and it was quite low, so very low cost materials. They had to design a prosthetic arm. Now, this wasn't just sort of a make-believe challenge. This is the kind of innovation that could really improve the lives of young people, children living, let's say, in a refugee camp, or someone who's been a victim of war, or who can't afford medical treatment living in the developing world. This sort of a low-cost prosthetic would really rapidly improve the life of a young person in that situation. And these students are putting it through their device through a series of challenges. Can it be used to pick up objects of different weights and transport them? Could you use it to throw and release, catch and release a ball, throw and release a ball? Could you tighten screw with this? So does it have that sort of fine motor opportunity? So these students are really living the innovation work right here in this challenge. These girls are also innovators. They came at an interesting question that appealed to them. They wondered, how high above the earth would you have to get to see the curve of the earth? They had seen that amazing picture we've all seen of the earth kind of from space, the blue marble of, that glorious photo taken at, the early days of the space race, and they wondered, how high above the earth do you have to go? And they wanted to send up a weather balloon, which you see the shadow of here in the foreground, and take some imagery, take some images and share that and kind of make their investigation very public. And they needed some resources to do that. They didn't have this kind of gear in the part of Kentucky where they happen to live, and so they innovated by making their campaign very public. They used a crowdfunding source called Kickstarter and ran a really successful social media campaign and found that a couple hundred people around the world shared their curiosity, thought they had a good question, good enough to pursue and actually to contribute to. So they were able to get others excited about their idea, and you see them here on launch day when they're sending up their weather balloon, which is going to sail up 23 miles above the surface of the earth and take some remarkable photos that these girls have used now as STEM ambassadors, sharing their excitement about science. Some other innovators hard at work in Massachusetts. This is Brookwood School in Massachusetts, where these students are working on a really global issue. Around the world, there are a couple of billion people who cook and heat their food with wood or something else that causes a lot of smoke, particularly if they're cooking indoors. And this has, of course, environmental consequences, but particularly tough health consequences, and particularly tough on children who may be breathing in this kind of smoke and damaging their young lungs, their developing lungs. And so these students are part of a global quest to come up with some clean burning cook stoves. They're using the innovators mindset to do that. And they're collaborating with other students around the world who are working on exactly the same challenge. So each class is coming up with its own design, then they're going to run the same tests and compare their data, improve these through an iterative process of taking a good idea and making it better through trial and error and feedback and all that great stuff. So there are example after example of young people who are already in the innovator role. And I'm sure if you want to add to the chat other examples that you've seen of students as innovators, taking on tough challenges, coming up with novel solutions, getting their ideas out there in the world where they can make a difference. That's kind of how I think of innovations, a very practical application of creativity. I just read yesterday or maybe today about some students in Hawaii who are living with a volcano literally in their backyard, and they came up with an air scrubber to clean the air of something I didn't even know existed, but something called VOG. If you imagine volcanic fog, some nasty stuff to breathe in, they came up with an air scrubber that's now available in a local hardware store. So our young innovators are all around us. Now, I've kind of been on a hunt for young innovators and the teachers who encourage them. And, as Kelly mentioned, I do a lot of writing in this space, most of it about project-based learning, and one book in particular, Bringing Innovation to School. I really looked hard for examples of innovation at work today in our classrooms, because my sense is we can't wait to get started with this kind of thinking and learning. If we want to unleash a new generation of innovators, we need to get them going today with kind of right-sized challenges and help them learn the thinking processes and gain the confidence that they need to take their good ideas and bring them out into the world. So this is something I've been looking for examples of, and I'm going to be sharing today some strategies that I think might help you if you're kind of on a quest to bring innovation to your school. So let's back up for a minute and think about our young innovators, our young potential innovators sitting in our classrooms right now. What do we know about them? One of the encouraging things that I know about them comes from the Gallup Hope Survey that told us that 42% of students grades 5 through 12 have this hope that they're going to be the one to come up with an invention that makes the world a better place. Now, that's a very grand, kind of powerful hope to be harboring. And they're thinking about innovation, I think, in kind of its highest form. That 42% isn't saying, I want to invent something that makes me the next gazillionaire. They're saying, I want to invent something that really improves the world, that makes the world a better place. So we know this about our students. We don't know that they're all getting to act on that impulse, but we know that almost half of those in our classes today have this feeling that they'd like to be involved in this kind of innovation. At the same time, we know that we've got an engagement issue, that while 55% of students feel engaged in school, that means 45% don't. If you were to map that line, you'd see a downward slope. So the longer students stay in school, the higher the grade level, the less engaged they feel. And that 17% of our students are actively disengaged. That means they're not showing up, or they're disruptive, or in some way they're making their unhappiness known. So that seems to me like a bit of a mismatch, that we have students with this impulse to do something wonderful and at the same time not feeling engaged and not feeling very motivated as they're sitting in classrooms. So I think in that gap, we might be able to find some opportunity. Now, if we back up even more and think about what are the pressures to innovate, where's the kind of institutionally, how as a society are we thinking about innovation? We're getting the pressure to encourage students to become innovators from all kinds of directions. It's all over the Common Core state standards. If you start looking for the language that is part of the innovation process, problem solving, critiquing to improve products, divergent thinking. This is just throughout the Common Core language. The processes of creativity and innovation are all over the place there. Same in the ISTE standards. These are the ISTE nets. Number one is about creativity and innovation. The Partnership for 21st Century Skills has really spelled out the importance of thinking creatively, and being able to put good ideas into practice, being able to implement innovations. These are all skills that our students need to be able to acquire by the time they finish grade 12. And of course, our politicians have been very outspoken about the need to prepare the current generation of students for the challenges ahead of them. And innovation is a big part of that. So in the field work that I did, lots and lots of classroom visits and interviews in writing, bringing innovation to school, one of my takeaways was that whenever I found situations where students were in the role of innovator, I also found teachers who were very comfortable with being innovators themselves. And it got me thinking about what's the profile of an innovative teacher, innovative thinker. What's the kind of mindset that we want to encourage in, and if there are barriers, what barriers do we want to get out of the way? So go through a few of these and then we'll see some more examples of all these coming up. But the first one is really being action oriented, not just talking about innovation in the theoretical sense, but actually doing something with ideas, putting ideas into action. Being able to build and really tap a network seems to be a skill that is essential for an innovative thinker. So having a personal learning network, using social media for professional learning, being a connected educator. We see that over and over again. Risk takers are pretty common in this space, as well as people who can imagine the benefits of looking ahead, who see an idea and think, I know how to use that. I can see where we could go with that. Kicking those obstacles out of the way, and then if you see a good idea, can you help it grow? Can you take it to scale? This is a quality of innovators that we see in the world largely, not just in education, but taking a good idea to scale is a big piece of innovation. And if you're a school leader, are these qualities in your teachers that you encourage, or do you discourage them? Are there ways that you could be hindering innovation with messages that are subtle or perhaps pretty overt? So when we find teachers who kind of fit this innovator profile, um, it, we can. Let me back up a little bit. I guess in my hunt for examples of teachers who fit this profile, I didn't have any shortage of good exemplars. We can find innovative educators, throughout our school systems. Sometimes they're under the radar, sometimes they're quite notable, quite visible, but we don't want for good examples. Don Wettrick is someone you may have heard of. He's written a wonderful new book called Pure Genius, and he's designed a whole class, a high school class. Um, I believe he's in Indiana, around the topic of innovations, where his students propose ideas that they want to tackle, problems they want to solve. And then his role is to help them get those ideas out there, connect them with mentors, as he says, cheerlead them to a great audience. So he's an example of someone who's taking this subject very seriously and has created a whole interdisciplinary class focused on innovation. Steve Ritz is in the Bronx in New York. He's just a remarkable guy to spend some time with. I've had the privilege of getting to know him over the last few years, and he started something called Green Bronx Machine. And as he will tell you, he works in the poorest congressional district in the U.S. And where most people would see a lack of resources, Stephen is the kind of innovative thinker who sees opportunities everywhere. He looks around himself at kind of uh, broken sidewalks and unfinished lots, and he sees great, room to move, room to improve, places for us to grow and expand. He happened to come upon an idea he saw something in practice in New York City, a vertical garden. So picture a wall with green things growing on it. There's a little bit of a glimmer of one over his shoulder here in this picture. And he thought, that is a great thing. And being one of these educators who could imagine where a good idea could go, he thought, what if I could scale that down? Just and have it be just the right size to bring into my classroom. Imagine what I, as a science teacher, could do with that. So he tracks down, being a risk taker, being bold, he tracks down the inventor of this vertical green wall, shares his idea that wouldn't a classroom version be great? And indeed, it is a great idea. They go ahead and figure out how to make that. And Stephen has accomplished one innovative idea after another with the use of this wall. His students are eating better. They're thinking about where their food comes from, the value of eating green things, which was new to many of them. Not only that, they've started entrepreneurship programs. You see a young man here selling some fruits and vegetables that they've grown themselves. They've grown hundreds of pounds of food, some of which they use to feed their own student body. They've also started some entrepreneurship projects where these students are now installing green walls as a business and earning good money doing that. So he's taken an interesting idea and taken it to an amazing scale. And you can read more about him at greenbronxmachine.org. And another person I've written about a fair amount, both at Edutopia and in Bringing Innovation to School, is Emily Piloton, who's another sort of a serial innovator in education who continues one great idea after another. She takes a design build approach to education where she thinks that students learn best when they're tackling real problems in their own communities and creating a new built environment that addresses those problems with some innovative solutions. So right here, you're seeing her students actually build their own classroom space. They needed bigger space to build the kinds of things that they were designing. And so they went out and built their own classroom out of a repurposed shipping container. She's been the feature of a documentary. I just wrote her about her last week at Edutopia, so you can find a lot more about her online at Project H Design. But these are just some of those isolated examples of fabulous innovators who are out there in the education space doing great work. And for me, as inspiring as their stories are, my sense is that's not enough. We can't reach all students with this opportunity to become innovators if the examples of innovation are happening only in silos and only in these kind of isolated, wonderful but isolated situations. How do we take some of the ideas that they've figured out kind of the hard way? How do we scale those out so that more students, many more students, have opportunities to be innovators themselves? So I'm going to run through, I think, 5 ideas that are just ripe for borrowing. And have kind of been field tested by some of our innovative pioneers in education, and that you can just run with in your own situation and see how far you might be able to take them. So the first one is creating a seed funding mechanism for classroom innovation. So what does this mean? So imagine that you're a teacher with some wonderful idea that if only you had a little bit of extra resources, you'd be able to implement. Well, a school district in Albemarle County, Virginia, has taken that idea and built it into kind of the DNA of their educational system. They have a seed fund of $100,000 that teachers can apply for. Kind of their in-house grant money. It's their R&D process where they get to pilot new ideas, test them out, find what works, and also find out what doesn't work so well so that they don't have to repeat mistakes down the road. Becky Fisher is one of the administrators there who works on this project, and as she points out, it's all about learning. And it's also about letting teachers know that their ideas are welcome. Imagine what that would feel like as an educator if you knew that in your district, your ideas were so valuable that your own district was willing to invest in you to put those forward. So this has led to a whole blossoming of great ideas coming from the grassroots in this district. They come forward, teachers come up with many more ideas than they're able to fund, so that the district has to be a little bit selective, but actually they have now a wealth of ideas that are promising, and maybe they'll find another way to fund them, or maybe they'll come around in next year's cycle. But it kind of creates this opportunity that your ideas are encouraged. Let's get them out here in the open where we can all learn together. Another good idea I just mentioned, let's get them out here in the open. Innovating in the open is something that you can can make happen in your own school setting without really any need for additional resources. It's all about a mindset of getting your students to share their ideas at that kind of rough prototyping stage, when they're maybe not polished yet, when they're ripe for improvement. We're seeing this happening in maker spaces. If you have a maker space in your school where kids can use kind of raw materials, cardboard and pipe, and perhaps there's some electronics involved to make prototypes of ideas that are in their mind's eye but aren't yet existing in the real world. Maker spaces and the whole maker education movement are all about bringing ideas out into the open and doing this in a collaborative way where kids can improve upon each other's ideas. So that may be something that's already happening in your school or something you've heard about. You may also be making different uses of your school library or media center. I've got a picture here from U Media Network, which is started in Chicago. But I've been seeing examples of libraries and media centers really getting remixed and used in different ways. So instead of being kind of places for quiet, personal investigations and quiet reading, these are places of creativity and collaboration. There may be recording equipment, as you see being used here in Chicago. There may be 3D printers, there may be laser cutters, there may be all different kinds of tools of production, but the library is becoming a space more and more for not just creativity, but collaboration and producing new things. So you might think about how you might reuse or remix existing spaces to encourage this kind of feeling that we're a community of people with ideas, and we have the resources and space, both literally space and kind of mental space, to take our ideas and bring them into the open. We're people who kind of swim in good ideas. Some of you may be experimenting with a Genius Hour or 20% time, where you take a little slice of time each week and make it open-ended for student exploration and investigation. This is a wall of wonder from a classroom I visited up in British Columbia, where a terrific teacher has created Genius Hour with her elementary students. And this wall stays up as a reminder that kids are full of good questions and that they can constantly be adding to this wall, and that they'll have time during the school year to investigate some of the questions that matter most to them. So idea, I think, number 3 we're up to is to think about the stories that you share with your students. If you're kind of stuck with teaching about innovation as something that happened a long time ago, those kind of Henry Ford, Thomas Edison days, maybe it's time to come up with some new stories to share with your students about who innovators are and how they work. And in fact, some very contemporary stories of who's kind of in this space today, who's working on hard problems, and what are some of those issues that they're tackling. I do some writing outside of education in the field of social innovation. The Stanford Social Innovation you see on the left there. It's a publication that I contribute to, and it gives me the opportunity to kind of pick the brains of contemporary innovators all the time and figure out which problems are they tackling. Why do these problems need a new solution, and how are they coming up with ideas to solve them? So these are just kind of a gold mine of ideas at the early stage. And there's just so much you can learn from paying close attention to how innovators think, how they frame problems, how they come up with interesting solutions. There are lots of resources to help you find some of these stories. These are a few of them. David Bornstein is a columnist for the New York Times. He writes a section called Fixes, which is an ongoing look at contemporary problem solvers. If you're looking for some nonfiction reading to share with students, probably at about a high school level would be appropriate. This is a terrific resource for you to bring into the classroom. And as he says, innovation is pretty wide open these days. It's a kind of a flat world when it comes to innovation and who's going to come up with the next great idea. And it's open for everyone to participate. And sometimes I just like to share kind of crazy ideas with students just to push their own thinking about how wild an idea is even possible. This was the winner, this picture symbolizes the winner of something called the Hult Prize 2 years ago. I think this was the winner. And the idea is to create a new kind of food source out of very apparently high quality protein that happens to be in insect form. Cricket farming is kind of at the heart of this project idea, and a cricket farm takes farming down to kind of a shoebox size, so micro farming. It's one of those kind of crazy, wild seeming out there ideas that has a lot of funding behind it, because there's apparently enormous potential for this idea to take hold and transform some issues like hunger, for example, and also to create job opportunities and entrepreneurship opportunities in surprising places. So sharing wild ideas with students sometimes gets them free to think about, well, what crazy ideas do I have, and could they really work? So some of the places you might find these, the Buckminster Fuller Index is an annual look at just some sometimes outrageously crazy ideas that have great potential to solve real problems. One of them that was recognized as a winner last year, picture styrofoam that actually grows out of mushroom-like material. That's what you're looking at here with something called Ecovative. Again, wild idea, might get your students thinking about how could we come at problems in really different ways, and what's even possible to make happen. And I think it's also important to remind students what it feels like to be a young person who's sitting on a good idea, that they are not, they don't have to wait until they become grown-ups to step into the role of innovator. These students I had the privilege of spending some time with this year. They had just won a competition in Cambridge, Massachusetts, with an innovative idea for a local sustainable nonprofit. Came out of a problem they wanted to address, and it won them a trip to China to take part in a student summit about global entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship. Um, this is the EF Challenge. And there are events like that happening increasingly around the world, bringing students together to solve problems today and not have to wait until they're grown-ups to get busy. And I think the look on their faces says a lot about what it feels like to come up with a good idea that other people recognize as having value. I think that's a pretty inspiring feeling to impart, for students who, if you think about where we started this conversation, if we have a lot of our students sitting feeling like education isn't all that interesting or compelling to them, wouldn't you rather kind of change tables and have them feeling like this, and that school is a place where they could come to learn how to make good ideas like this happen? So next idea, this is probably the most disruptive of any that I'm going to talk about today, and that's to take on the nasty topic of failure and reframe it as a step in the learning process. We all, I think, in education have learned to fear failure, students most of all. The F grade is the big dreaded grade that you want to avoid at all costs. But if you talk with people who have come at problem solving in a very serious way and accomplished great things, they will tell you over and over again that they went through probably multiple tries to get to success. They didn't succeed the first time out, and that they learned from the various steps that they went through that didn't work. So we have to think about, how do we create opportunities for students to learn in that way? We can look historically and find some inspiration, some kind of words of wisdom from folks like Edison. We can look at our current innovators hard at work and some of their slogans, like move fast, break stuff, or fail forward, or the things that you hear from folks in the tech sector. Fail fair and admitting failure are two examples of platforms to learn from failure in a really positive way. Admitting failure was designed by Engineers Without Borders as a way to take ideas that were attempted and didn't work, kind of share them publicly, learn from them, and make sure that others don't have to go through the same failed attempts. These particular ideas that Engineers Without Borders are describing on admitting failure are having to do with engineering issues in the development sector. So ways to kind of improve life in the developing world, attempts that didn't work very well. Why repeat those failures, right? Why take the same missteps again and again? So instead, let's get them out there publicly, share them, learn from them, and move on with the next best idea. So these are models that I think we could bring into the classroom. If we look at how adults learn from failure, why couldn't we help students kind of go through some of the same processes? And as we hear from Engineers Without Borders, it's not just admitting failure that's important, but figuring out how to integrate those lessons. That's how you really make a difference. So where in the project-based learning process, most of the student examples I've talked about have happened, those innovation examples have happened in the course of some sort of a project-based learning experience. And where in this process do we have the opportunity for failure to happen for students? And I would say that you don't want them to fail when they're sharing their project with a public audience. By the time they get to the end of the project, you want them to have achieved some success, right? So the time to look at learning from failure would happen in the critique and revision cycle. So kind of in that messy middle of a project, when students have thought about an interesting driving question that perhaps addresses a problem they really care about. They've maybe done some brainstorming or research to come up with some good ideas. They're now working on some kind of a solution or something they're going to devise or develop or share to address this question. You want them to have time in that messy middle to go through multiple drafts of critique, revision, improvement, not just one shot. Here's what I tried, worked or it didn't work, but how do we take this idea and really improve it, kind of massage it and tweak it and make it the best it can be? That's where you want to apply the learning from failure motto, I think, in education. So of course we don't want students failing to learn. We don't want students failing to engage, but we do want them to learn from their attempts that weren't successful the first time out. So that's when I talk about learning from failure, that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. Brian, I hope the question you've asked here, I hope that helps answer that a little bit, and we can come back to that in some Q&A time at the end. And so what does this look like if you're going to kind of reframe that messy middle as an opportunity to learn from failure? Here was a reflection prompt that a physics teacher shared with his students. They were working on some sort of a design of a robot. They were doing some on-screen modeling. And the teacher's prompt was just to take a screenshot each day to help them think about, where am I in the process? What helped me take a big step forward or backward in the design process? And then kind of keep track of that, almost like a design notebook. What did you change from the last time? What did you do? What were the results of that transformation? So kind of really thinking through that whole feedback revision process. Similarly, this young man is in the middle of a design challenge where his team was charged with coming up with a shoe design that would solve a particular user's footwear problem. Interesting project to kind of watch, and these students were getting ready to share their prototypes with some professional footwear designers. So they were going to have a very serious critique session, but I think what's interesting to notice here is that the prototype for this footwear is made out of clay. So it's not a finished product yet. It's very malleable at this stage, still subject to revision, based on the feedback and reflection that happens at this stage. So you can be really deliberate about giving students both opportunities to learn from what's working and what's not, and some structure, some critique protocols, some prototyping time and materials, and the opportunity to kind of learn from that on the way to a finished project. And when you encourage this spirit in students, you wind up with a young man like Jack Andraka. If you haven't heard Jack's story, his TED Talk is really worth watching. He's just going to be one of those amazing scientific medical breakthrough inventors of the future. He has been already. He's a young man who came up with a test and early detection for a form of cancer, pancreatic cancer, that's often caught too late to treat. And he wanted to come up with an early form of detection because he knew someone who had been diagnosed late and had dire consequences resulted. He had this idea for something that required a pretty professional caliber lab in order to test. And as you listen to his TED Talk, he'll tell you that he was still a high school student, about 15, I think, and he started writing letters to lab after lab after lab, asking for permission at the university level to come use the research lab to run some tests that he needed to run to see if his idea could work. And he kept getting the, of course not answers, or sort of the patronizing, well, maybe by the time you're in college or as a graduate student, you could work here. Why was anyone going to open a lab to a 15-year-old? And I think a lot of young people would have just given up and thought, well, I thought I had an idea. I'm just too young to find out, maybe someday. But not this guy. He just kind of keeps going and writing letters and emails until finally, a couple hundred tries later, finds the lab that's willing to open its doors to him and goes ahead and proves that his idea indeed works. And that kind of persistence is something that we need to encourage in students and not squelch. And so if you can find opportunities to say yes to young people with ideas, even if they're at the rough, raw stage where those ideas are not final and polished and perfect yet, but you don't want to squelch them. You want to find ways to say yes and be encouraging. So I think my last suggestion for you is to invite others to join you. The more folks I've talked with who work in the field of innovation, who come up with great ideas, this is not a solo game. We often may romanticize that innovators, inventors are working off on their own in some quiet lab, workshop space, coming up with some ingenious idea. But when I talk with folks who are rolling up their sleeves and getting to work on problems, it's almost always a team effort. Very seldom do you find someone who's working solo. So you want to encourage others to join you in your efforts and help your students think about who could help them take their idea forward. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't have pride of ownership of their own ideas, but if they're going to grow them and really take ideas to scale, they're probably going to need some people to come along with them. And knowing how to invite others to join you is really part of the Innovators Toolkit. So I wrote at length in my book on innovation about these students in Indiana who designed water filtration devices for a village in Haiti. So complicated project for a science class. This is kind of a general science class. And in order to make it all work and actually to get these installed in Haiti, which they managed to do and probably save some lives during a cholera outbreak, they needed to get connected with an engineer who allowed them to take his prototype design and tweak it and improve it and adapt it for the use it was going to have in Haiti. They needed to get lots of resources from their local community in a small town. They had to do a lot of outreach and telling of their story, and they had to kind of get a whole team together to make this project effective. So being able to bring others on board, knowing how to share your excitement in a good idea is part of what makes for a good innovator as well. And I think it's also a good message for students who may think, but I'm not the kind of person who's going to come up with some amazing idea. I just don't see myself in that role. But that same student may be able to contribute, build on someone else's idea, help tell the story. There may be a remarkable storyteller in your group who can partner with the one who has an innovative idea, and together they not only have the idea but the story to go with it and to help it grow. So be thinking about how your students can help invite others into their brainstorming, into their idea making. Um, and I think surprising things happen over and over again when we find young people with great ideas. This young man, I think he was just 13. His name is Viraj Puri, and he was just 13 when he got the idea for creating kind of a map of where is bullying happening in the U.S. His point was, if we know where it's happening, then we can do something about it. He had a very personal reason for wanting to prevent bullying. He had a brother who had experienced some pretty severe bullying, and he wanted to make sure that this didn't happen in other communities and to other kids. And his idea was, what if we could create kind of a heat map that would show us the bullying hotspots? How would we do that? And he had the kind of raw idea. He had enough computer science background to think that, well, social media is a source of real-time information. Maybe we could turn the data that we find in Twitter into a geographic map of bullying hotspots. And this is a tough idea. He wanted to create a heat map. But it was an interesting enough idea that he recruited some top data scientists in the US to help him figure out how to make this work. They thought that his idea had merit. They had more technical ability than he did and could advise him. He also got lots of Congress folks interested. Here you see him with one of his congressmen talking about the need for more policies to prevent bullying at the national level. But the idea that he was able to reach out and find people with great technical skills to help take his idea and put it into action, I think is pretty inspiring. I talked with one of those data scientists who was working at Georgetown University in Washington, and he'd had some emails exchanges with this young man and had no idea how young Viraj really was. They tried to set up a time for a meeting, and Viraj said, no, I can't make it then. And he said, well, why not? And he said, well, I can't get a ride yet from my mom, and I'm still in school. And the researcher found out that this kid was, still in middle school, and yet sitting on a really great, potentially useful idea. So helping students develop that courage to kind of reach out and ask others to help them bring their ideas to fruition is something we can encourage with students, all the time. And this is another story you can find in Edutopia. It's about a team of students who took on a really challenging task of designing a prosthetic hand for a 3-year-old boy. I'm sharing it here just because the teacher's comment, I think, is pretty uplifting. And his point is, the kids are really ripe for doing real things. They shouldn't have to wait until they're grown-ups. They shouldn't have to wait until later in life to take ideas and do meaningful things with them. And for this project to work, it involved a very complicated team coming together, lots of challenges along the way. They were working with some open source software developed in South Africa for an adult user. They had to adapt it for a 3-year-old child, solve all kinds of, biomechanical challenges, material science challenges. The teacher himself describes himself as someone who's not very good at putting things together. So, not somebody who's terribly good with tools and 3D printing and all of that. So they had to find some people who did have those skills and to develop their own skills. And here you see the young recipient of their innovative work on the day that he gave this prosthetic device a test run, and there's a video of him throwing a ball for the first time that will just bring you to tears. It's pretty remarkable, and especially when you listen to all the middle school students who designed this hand standing behind him and just cheering. It's just wonderful. And again, that's something you can find on Edutopia. I think someone's adding a lot of these links to the chat, which I appreciate. So how do you put these pieces together? I'm going to talk just a couple of strategies and then open up to some questions. So a couple recommendations that I came up with. One is that innovation can mean a lot of different things in practice. You may have students who want to be working on global issues. Your school may be focused on very local problem solving. I encourage you to have a good conversation and kind of define your edge. Where are we going to make our mark as a school or as a district? What is it that's going to define us in this kind of innovation space? I've got an example here of a group of schools, the Henry Ford schools based out of Detroit, that use design thinking as one of their strategies. They put on some design thinking institutes. That's a strategy that many are finding appealing as a way to give kids a language around problem solving and coming up with interesting designs. I shared earlier the example of Emily Pillaton, who has her students build real things, much in the way that architects do, exactly in the way that architects do, to improve their local community. So very local focus for what they're doing. Other schools are interested in global citizenship, and so the work that their kids are doing are focused in that way. So this is one of those conversations you want to have as a school and think about, where is it that we're going to kind of focus our energies if we're going to kind of go in this direction. Once you kind of define the sorts of problems you're really interested in tackling, then you're going to start finding those issues all around you. And you can have no shortage of good problems for your students to tackle and allies to find. Coming up with that kind of definition is helpful for the innovative educator. Leah Penniman is one at Tech Valley High School in New York who's been doing a series of projects, STEM projects, that connect her students with a community in rural Haiti. They've designed all kinds of projects to improve the life of folks there. But her point is she used to be the kind of teacher who did this solo. She was that kind of lone innovator that I was talking about earlier. Now she's in a school where she said, innovation is the air my students breathe. So she's in a school that really embraces students as innovators. How can we get kids thinking in this way, coming up with their solutions, making the world a better place all the time? And what a difference that makes, for everyone involved. So kind of find your edge and then help your students find the right size problems. We don't want to frustrate them with problems that they're never going to be able to solve because they're just too enormous or too remote. So find things that are relatable where they can really take action kind of within their grasp. I like to say big enough to matter and small enough to tackle. So that's kind of part of the art of teaching is helping to kind of scaffold that and helping make right size challenges for your kids to dig into. And I think students themselves remind us that they're ready for this kind of work. One of my colleagues at Edutopia polled her middle school students about, what they care about, what engages them in learning. And this opportunity to really to wrestle with things that matter is what's going to kind of move our kids out of that disengaged sector and into the engaged, eager to learn, eager to contribute space. So finally, I encourage you to share your stories when your kids do wonderful things, when they put their problem solving to work. Don't keep it a secret. By all means, get it out there. It's a big part of project-based learning that we have a kind of a culminating event at the end where students reflect on and share and contribute their work to a public audience. These students were in uh, a school serving largely Native American students. I believe it's called the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. And you can look for their video online. It's called More Than That. But they wanted to respond to some negative media that had aired on a national broadcast about growing up on reservation land, you know, what it's like for a young Native American person to be growing up in America today. And they felt that the media was very one-sided. It wasn't the story that told their story. And so they responded, put their own response video on YouTube. And you can see from the ticker here that the last time I took a screenshot, they had had more than 94,000 views. And this was from a community where I believe the whole reservation population is about 6,000 people. So once they got their story out there, it had just, you know, remarkable impact. These students wound up traveling to Washington, D.C., first flight for most of them, to speak to a national conference that worked with schools like theirs about, you know, what do we need to grow up healthy and take advantage of everything, you know, grow into the people we want to grow into. They became really strong advocates for themselves and for their community. So when you've done something remarkable, be sure to share your story, kind of get it out there. And what I'd like to do now is share your questions. I'm going to take a look at kind of what's come up in the frame here, but feel free to add more questions as we're going. And Brian had asked about how do you reframe how parents look at failure as part of the learning process. I think that's a great question, and it's also raises the issue of bringing parents into the conversation about how education is changing, how the way their students are learning. Let's say you're in a project-based learning setting. Class probably doesn't look the same way that class did when those parents were sitting in the chairs. The chairs themselves may be in a different configuration, very likely are from what parents might remember. So I think parents need to understand the purpose. Why are things shifting in the ways that they're shifting? Why are students using technology in the ways that they're using it? Why are they tackling real world problems rather than learning from a textbook? Why are those things happening? And then I think they'll see the purpose of where failure fits into that learning process on the way to successful results. And so helping parents see what's happening with their students' learning, and particularly having parents there at the end of the project when students share the results and reflect on how far they've come. Those are pretty powerful moments. I hope that helps, and feel free to add follow-up questions. The next one was about a school culture change away from assignments and points to focus on process and achievement focus. And, you know, again, I think this is in line with what I was just talking about, that when if we're really going to look at some shifts in how students learn and what they accomplish and what's the evidence that they've learned well, that evidence probably isn't going to count for a whole lot if it's just points on a test or worksheet. What does that really tell us about what kids can do with their understanding? The beauty of the project-based learning approach is that you do see students applying their understanding to create something, to make something, to advocate for something. You see where they can go with their learning. And I think that's pretty compelling evidence. Another question here from Thor. Have researchers looked at if there's a correlation between innovation and creativity in the classroom? And Thor, I don't have an answer to that. I think it's an interesting question, and I don't know. I know there are some folks who are, you know, looking at the role of creativity, and I have to tell you that I don't know if anyone's looking at the relationship between innovation and creativity. So I can't answer that one, but I think it's a good question for further exploration. Other questions that folks want to add, or did I miss any others in the discussion at the left, Kelly, as folks were going along? I'm just kind of
The left was just a lot of commentary. The questions are really primarily down below.
Okay, great. Okay, well, I think we've gone through most of those questions. I wanted to share with folks my contact information in case they have follow-up questions for me. I'm active on Twitter. I am somebody who likes to network, feel free to reach out with email if there are particular resources, or if I mentioned an example that you'd like to hear more about, let me know. And I've shared the link to my Edutopia blog and also a blog I maintain about project-based learning with more resources there. So feel free to reach out anytime. This has been kind of a quick, fast dive into innovation, but there are just some really exciting things happening in our schools, and I guess my feeling is the more the better, and the more we hear about them, the more these ideas can kind of grow and expand.
Suzie, again, thank you so much for coming and speaking with us tonight.
Oh, totally my pleasure. Enjoyed it.
As always, show your support for creativity and education. Tweet your takeaways, tweet your resources for innovation in the classroom with the hashtag CreateEDU. And if you would like to learn more about upcoming sessions in the series, you may do that at edx.adobe.com/professional-development/events. If you have not heard about the ConnectEd initiative, a huge culmination piece to bring access to Title I schools, so we invite you to learn more at edx.adobe.com/connected. As always, make sure you're using the hashtag CreateEDU, and we'll see you next time.